So hi everyone. This is Millie's Guide to UK versus US Law. So I'm just going to be talking about the differences between, qualifying in the UK versus qualifying in the US, the different processes and things like that. So my name is Amira. I'm a lawyer at this small firm, independent firm in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. It's called Ibrahim & Partners. I do a lot of different corporate, commercial, things like that. I've done a range of things, in the UK and in the UAE. I'm originally from Egypt, but I actually grew up in the UAE, and I went to an IB school, an international school in Dubai. So I did my undergraduate in law in the UK, and then I qualified in New York, and then I cross-qualified in the UK. So I'll talk about that a bit later. And even in the UAE, I still use, the things that I learned in the UK and the US. So that's the common law system, whereas in the UAE, it's what's called a civil law system. So I'll talk a bit more about that as well, just to give you some bit of an understanding. So at the end, have a dedicated time to answering questions, but feel free to put them in the chat at any time and I'll get to them at the end. So generally what I'm going to be covering today is an overview of UK versus US, and then move on to paths to qualifications. And then I'll talk about how I qualified and why I did it that way, after giving you a bit of information and context as to how to qualify. I'm going to try and explain how you can choose which one to qualify in. So in the UK versus the US, truths and myths about law school generally, and resources that you can use. And then at the end, we'll be covering questions. So in terms of the main differences between the UK and the US, the main thing is whether you can go straight to law school from high school. Generally in the UK, that is common and that's what most people do, but you really don't have to do that. A lot of people are studying different things before they go to law school. So you can do history, you can do physics, maths, chemistry, English. These are some of the most popular pre-law degrees that I've come across that people have done. And, it's a good way to figure out, that you can do something that you like before you, commit to law school. And in the US, you actually can't go straight to law school. You have to do an undergraduate and then you go to law school. So in terms of the undergraduate, you have options such as pre-law. And this is, mostly when you know that you're going to do law and you don't really want to do anything else. Or you can do something different at the beginning at an undergraduate level, like political science, history, things like that. And then you move on to the Juris Doctor, which is the JD. That's basically the law degree that you need to do to be able to move on and qualify as a lawyer. In terms of, being a lawyer, there are different types. So in the US, it's mostly what is called an attorney. And an attorney is just a general lawyer. You can do things, directly with clients. You can go to court. You generally have the right to practice in several ways. It's not restricted. But in the UK, there are actually two types of lawyers. So there are solicitors and barristers. So solicitors generally do more commercial type of things. They do a lot of behind the scenes kind of things in a way. They mostly work at law firms. And I would say that most of the lawyers in the UK are actually solicitors. The only thing is that solicitors are not allowed to go to court. So that's the distinction. In the UK, barristers can only go to court and they have what is called the right of audience. And the qualification procedure for solicitors and barristers are a bit different. So that's something to consider as well. So definitely, if you want to go to court, then you should focus on the barrister route if you're going to go in the UK. In terms of the teaching methods in law school, the UK, they generally have, traditional lectures, big halls, that most of the cohort sits in the lecture room, and it's quite, passive learning. People just talk to you for an hour or two and you make notes. Sometimes they ask questions, things like that. And then you have smaller groups that are called seminars or tutorials, and that's where you have, questions, discussions, things you need to prepare for. But again, this differs depending on the law school that you go to. So this is quite common in, for example, London law schools or things like that, whereas in places like Oxford or Cambridge or Nottingham, these universities, they're a bit different, and they focus a lot more on smaller groups, just to ensure that, the teaching is more suited to how they want to do it. The teaching method at law school in the US is called the Socratic method. Now, because you go to law school at a higher level in the US, it's a bit more intense. So you would have to be prepared for those lectures, and you can get asked a question at any time, no matter where you're sitting or what you're doing, and you have to answer. You would have to at least try to answer. So it's a bit more intense, whereas the UK style, it's a bit more chill. And that's because, again, in the UK, you're mostly doing law school at an undergraduate level, but in the US, it's at a higher level. So it's a bit, you're expected to have a bit more preparation and be able to do these things a bit better. In terms of law schools generally, you have most of the law schools in the UK, they offer both undergraduate and postgraduate sort of degrees for law. And they're quite, they would have these similar teaching styles and things like that. Obviously, you wouldn't have to go to, like Oxford or Cambridge or anything like that for a good law school. There are plenty of law schools around the UK. In the US, it's a bit different because the JD, you would need to go to a law school that has a really good JD program. That would be, it's a bit more important in the US as to which law school you go to. But again, as long as you get, good grades and you understand what you're doing and you have good experience and things like that, it just depends on your circumstances, how you would choose your law school and things like that, but definitely a bit more emphasis on the type of law school in the US. In terms of law school applications, in the UK, obviously you use UCAS, which is this program for like a unified sort of application system. Generally, you're limited to 5 universities, and if you do get accepted, you get conditional offers most of the time. Sometimes you'd have to do interviews. You would still have to, submit a personal statement. So that's just generally how the applications work. In the US, there's a bit more of emphasis on the personal statement. And each law school would have their own application method generally. There are some law schools that use a sort of unified method, but usually each law school would tell you how you would apply and the deadlines and things like that. Something else to keep in mind is the exams sometimes that you have to do before you can apply to law school. In the UK, there are only a few universities that require the LMAT, which is the law exam that it just tests your skills, whether you're suited for law or not. But most law schools, or most schools that do offer law degrees, they don't usually require LMATs. But again, that's something to consider and to check in terms of timing and when you're going to be applying and things like that. In the US, because it's at a higher level, you do have to do the LSAT. So it's a bit similar to that. So you have to do these exams and you have to pass them in order to go to law school. So paths to qualification. I'm going to be talking a lot about what all of this means. So the reason why, it's kind of a lot of things is because I will talk about the traditional and the non-traditional methods. And in the non-traditional methods, I'll also cover what a foreign person can do if, they're foreign to the US or the UK, and how to go about that. So in the US, generally you can do an undergraduate degree. It doesn't necessarily have to be a law degree, but that's your sort of the undergraduate level, whether it's in the US or in another country. But typically, if you know that you're going to go to the US to go to law school or practice as a lawyer there, it would be best to do law at what is called the common law jurisdiction. So common law is just the type of system in most Western countries. So places like the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and things like that. Other systems, particularly in Asia or Africa, they use civil law. So they're a bit different. At the end of the day, if you know that you're going to go into, UK, US, places like that, it would be best to start off in a common law jurisdiction and do a law degree there or a type of degree there before you move on. So after the degree in the US, whether it's in the US or in another country, you typically either move on to the Juris Doctor, so the JD, the actual law degree, so the postgrad that you have to do essentially, or you can do a master's degree in the US. And to explain this a bit more, in order to do the bar exam to actually qualify in the US, which is basically the last stage in terms of examinations, they have to see that you've done a law degree that is similar to what a student in the US would have studied. Now, if you have done a law degree in a foreign country and you've gained basically the same amount of skills and knowledge as someone who has studied in the US, you typically can go straight to the bar exam. So you basically skip this stage and you go straight from the undergraduate to the bar exam. But if you did a law degree, even in a common law country, and you didn't get the same amount of credits for your classes or things like that, sometimes they do tell you to do a master's degree in a US law school. So that's why you have an additional stage at that point, sometimes depending on whether you've done, the degree that they would accept or not. This is, considered at the stage when you're actually applying for the bar exam. And you basically submit your papers and they make sure that everything is in order. So this is completely subjective. But as long as you do, for example, like a UK law degree, it's almost guaranteed that you'll be able to qualify in the US as well. And then in terms of the bar exam itself, this depends on the state. They have different requirements, and there are two types of exams, basically. There's the unified bar exam, which is used in, for example, New York, and there are specific state exams. So they're a bit different, but essentially, they test whether you have the legal knowledge and the legal skills. And then after you pass the bar exam and you finish all the requirements, you would apply for admission. So it's just in terms of paperwork. They do an interview, but it's a routine interview. And it's at that stage, it's the easy part. You've done all of the hard work by that stage. In terms of the UK, everything on that slide is about being a solicitor, because that's how I qualified as a solicitor. I will talk a bit more about being a barrister at the end, just so that if you are interested in becoming a barrister, you have the sort of knowledge to kind of understand where you need to start. So again, the solicitor is basically the type of lawyer that they do legal work, you know, the contracts, they can work finance, tax, anything like that. Any type of law really, but they just can't go to court and, you know, make a case, the kind of that you see on TV. So, and then the barrister is the one that can go to the courts and, you know, make their submissions before a judge and things like that. So in terms of the UK, you do an undergraduate degree. That can be law or anything else. Typically in the UK, it's not necessary to do an undergraduate law degree because they do have sort of a conversion degree where it's basically like an accelerated law degree. In a way, it's a bit similar to the JD in the US. So you either do an undergraduate degree and you go straight into the qualification process, or you do a degree in something else and then you move on to the conversion degree, which is the GDL. And then after you basically do the law school portion, right now, they have what is called the legal practice course. This is typically a 9-month course, but it can be less depending on your circumstance, where you learn more practical skills and they teach you how you would actually be a lawyer. And this is basically what the bar exam is for the UK. But this, we don't call it the bar exam because the bar exam is more reserved to the barrister route, but this is basically a qualification exam. And if you're already qualified in another jurisdiction, so for example, you've done the US route and you're qualified in the US and you want to try and qualify in the UK as well, instead of the legal practice course, you go into the qualified lawyers transfer scheme. But right now, there is actually a change in the sort of process in the UK. And starting September of this year, they're replacing the legal practice course and the qualified lawyers transfer scheme with something else. And that's the solicitor's qualifying exam. The problem with, you know, saying you shouldn't care about the legal practice course or the qualified lawyers transfer scheme at all is that this is a new thing, the solicitor's qualifying exam. They're not 100% sure about how it's going to be applied in the future. It's definitely coming into force at that time. And it is, you know, there are a lot of programs that have started to prepare you for the solicitor's qualifying exam. But in terms of, you know, things like materials or skills or the way that it's taught, it's very similar, almost identical really, to the old route, which is the legal practice course and the qualified lawyers transfer scheme. Also, if you have, you know, you want to do the US route and you've actually finished it, instead of the qualified lawyers, you go straight into the solicitor's qualifying exam. So that the solicitor's qualifying exam fully replaces the LPC and the QLTS, so the legal practice course and the qualified lawyers transfer scheme. But this is something that I get asked about a lot in terms of the material. So if you are going to go this route, you know, the materials from these old courses would still be fine. And then after, you know, you do the exam, there's actually a training period required for the UK, which is not required in the US. Previously, it was the 2-year training contract. This is still in force. So if you've already started, you know, the procedure for anything, you would still be able to do the legal practice course and things like that. It just depends on the timing. And in that case, you would still be able to do a 2-year training contract. That wouldn't have changed yet. But if you're going to go into the solicitor's qualifying exam route, you need to do 2 years of recognized training. And that's basically just the same thing, but they've made it more flexible. So you can do, you know, those 2 years broken up over maybe like 4 different law firms or things like that. So it's designed to be more open and flexible to, you know, allow you to gain this experience without, having to apply to a bunch of different law firms and try and do everything. And, there's a lot of people that are applying and it's very competitive. So this was a way for them to open it up a bit more. And then again, after you finish your training period, you apply for admission. It's mostly paperwork and fees, things like that. Now, the reason why I focused so much about the paths to qualification is that this isn't highlighted a lot in law school. And you would need to understand how you're actually going to become a lawyer if you do want to become a lawyer, and how many exams you're going to have to do and how many stages there are. Because in law school, they do tell you, oh yes, you have to do like a qualification exam and things like that, but they don't emphasize the different routes that are available. Mostly they just focus on the traditional way, which is, like a law degree and then the exam and then the 2 years training and things like that. They don't explain that you can qualify somewhere else and then cross-qualify. And the reason for that is because there is sort of ease to the traditional method. A lot of people do it, and that's what employers are used to, that's what law schools are used to, and things like that. But that doesn't have to be the only way that you go. You can try and, if you have the drive and you want to do different things, this would actually be an advantage for you if you don't go through the traditional route. And try and gain different types of experiences. It's really important nowadays, especially because a lot of people have done the traditional way, and it doesn't mean that it's the only right way. So in terms of being a barrister, just really quickly, if you want to be a barrister in the UK, you do your undergraduate degree in law, typically. If you do another degree, you still have to do a conversion degree. And then you go into a similar training course, basically, which is called the Bar Professional Training Course. And then after that, you do a training period as well, but it's called a pupillage. And it's with what's called a chamber. Because for barristers, you don't actually work in a law firm, you work with a chamber. Sometimes you're self-employed. A bit of a warning about the barrister route: it is very difficult for foreign students because of visa restrictions. And again, this is something that's not emphasized, but it's something to consider so that you can understand, the options and how it is. It's really a difficulty as well in terms of the timing. So you can go through, the exams and the training procedures, but to actually be able to go into training, you need to have a work visa. And work visas are unfortunately not easily granted in the UK. So that's just something that you have to consider if you want to try the barrister route. But typically, most of the people who are foreign and have qualified in the UK, usually it's through the solicitor route rather than the barrister route. It's only if you have a real passion for, going to court and you really want to go to court in the UK that, I would say you can try and, figure out a way to actually do this. So now I'll explain how I qualified with all of that background in mind. So again, I went to law school in the UK. So I went to Queen Mary University. I did an undergraduate degree there. And then unfortunately, I wasn't actually able to secure a training contract during law school. Usually, law firms, they try and recruit 2 years in advance. So you would actually have to apply 2 years in advance. And there are very limited spaces. And especially for people who are on student visas, it's very limited because they have to basically sponsor a work visa for you. So that's just another thing to keep in mind as well. there are different methods to get into these, like training, programs. You can do like what is called a vacation scheme first, and then go into a training contract. That's the most common way to do it. But it's just something to keep in mind because it is very competitive and it's not very easy for foreign students to be able to get a training contract in the UK. It's definitely possible and a lot of people have, but you just have to keep in mind that you really need to show that you really are dedicated to becoming a lawyer in the UK and fulfilling all of the requirements that that particular law firm would require. So after law school, because I didn't get the training contract, I just felt like I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I did the LPC, the legal practice course, just to basically do the next step, but still buy myself enough time to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to move on, because I was feeling a bit disappointed that I wasn't able to get a training contract or anything like that. So in BPP, that's where I went to do the legal practice course. I applied for a few places. It was definitely a more successful way for me because I did manage to do a bit of paralegal jobs and internships and things like that. But again, I wasn't able to, get a full proper training contract. And by that time, my visa was almost, the timing for my visa was ending. So I actually had to leave the country. So I left. And I basically decided to take a break and reconsider if I even wanted to be a lawyer, because I really wasn't sure what I was doing. And I was getting rejected from a lot of places and I just didn't know what to do. And then I actually met up with my current boss because I know him from someone that I worked with before. And we met up for coffee and he was explaining the different ways that you can qualify and how you can do these things. And he suggested that I try and qualify through basically in New York, because New York is actually one of those states where you don't have to study in the US to be able to qualify. California as well is one of those states, but not all states allow you to qualify in their state without having studied in that state. So that is something that is very important to keep in mind as well. Anyway, so I thought about it and it made sense to me that I just wanted to qualify at that point because I did have a few job offers in the UAE. And I just really needed to qualify to be able to, become a lawyer rather than just like a paralegal or things like that. So I did the exams and I passed on the first try and I was able to qualify by mid-2020 because of a few delays because of COVID, but it's behind us now. I was able to qualify. And around that time, is when the UK announced that they're replacing the exams, the LPC, so the legal practice course, and the solicitors qualifying, the qualified lawyers transfer scheme exams, and that they're being replaced with the solicitors qualifying exam at a later stage. And I felt like I wasn't done trying to qualify in the UK, and I really wanted to push myself and try. So I basically studied for it while I was, working at the firm that I'm currently working at, and they were very supportive actually. And so I did the exams. It was in July, and it was very tough to, have to quarantine and do the mask, the exams with the mask on. A lot of them were oral exams, but I managed to pass again on the first try, and I just qualified in January actually. So that was one of the best decisions that I've made, because then I was able to be, dually qualified into, very good common law jurisdictions. And because I'm qualified in those places, I was also able to be registered in the UAE and in Dubai. So it was definitely the way that I qualified was suitable for me, even though it wouldn't work for anyone else. And it was to my advantage. And actually, I practice sort of UK law the most, more than anything else. So this is why the traditional way is not always the best way. It depends on your circumstances and your priorities and what you want to do as a lawyer and just generally in your professional career. So in terms of which one to choose, this depends on so many factors because, like I said, the way that you qualify and things like that would sort of impact why you should choose UK versus US. So the first thing is you need to consider your ability to practice in that country. So in the UK, generally, if you go to law school and you qualify in England, you're qualified in England and Wales. Because Scotland have their own rules and Ireland have their own rules. So you're basically all of England, you can work there. In the States, because each state has their different state laws and things like that, you would need to consider which state you want to actually practice in. So I chose New York because the main reason is that I really liked New York and I liked the systems that they have. To me, they took, the UK system and they improved the things that needed improving. So I was really excited about it and I just generally liked New York. And then it's also one of those places where as a foreign person, you can qualify there and it's not an issue and you can practice there. So to me, that was the best choice. So you would need to consider which state you have to practice in. And then in terms of post-university requirements, you have to consider, that depending on the way that you choose to go to law school and to qualify, there are different exams, different requirements. For example, in the UK, you have to do those 2 years training period if you're qualifying from that undergraduate level, whereas in the US, you don't have to do the training period. You just have to do a bit of work experience and it's very flexible and you can do it, generally speaking, in terms of New York, you can do it in any country, really. And so it's just very different. And then, so the types of requirements that you have after university, you should keep that in mind for when you figure out which one you should choose. And then in terms of the type of law that you want to practice, there are each country would focus on a few different things. So right now in the legal world, technology is a huge thing, and that's common for all countries and jurisdictions. But in the UK, you would have a bit more emphasis on tax and finance. A lot of current law firms in the UK are really looking for those types of lawyers. So if you're interested in that, then the UK would be a good place to practice there. In the US, it's very similar as well, but depending on the state, they would have different requirements. And even at a younger stage, sometimes you would have to consider, what do you want to do? And if you already know what you want to do and you're already passionate about it, then why not try and pursue it from the beginning? In terms of finances, the US is definitely more expensive than the UK. The law schools there are a lot more expensive, higher tuition fees, higher living fees, especially if you're going to a state like New York. If you're going to go to, for example, a law school there, or if you go to a top university there, it will definitely be more expensive. The UK, a law degree in the UK is also a bit expensive, but compared to the US, it's less. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Law school itself, so the way that they teach in both of those countries is something to consider. So for example, for me, the Juris Doctor or the JD would terrify me. And even though, you know, even in the UK, you would still be expected to participate and things like that, it's a bit less daunting when you're in a smaller group in those seminars and tutorials. But in the US, you know, in a big hall, when you have all these people to be called on and, you know, answer these questions, I wasn't as comfortable with that. So that's something to keep in mind. So the UK style, the fact that you can go to law school right away and you can qualify in less time, that's something that appealed to me. Whether you want to go to court and basically have what is called the right of audience, and that basically means you be able to go to court, make submissions before a judge, defend, and things like that, the way that you see on TV. So in the UK, you have to be a barrister to do that, and like I said, it's a bit more difficult for foreign people. Whereas in the US, generally, if you're an attorney, you generally have the right to practice fully, and you're able to go to court. And then in terms of jobs, there is a preference in the US for people who have done the Juris Doctor. It is a bit more difficult to find a job in the US if you didn't do it. It's not impossible, and there are a lot of people who have gotten jobs and who have actually practiced as foreign lawyers before they, you know, proceeded to qualify in the US, things like that. A lot of people go through that way, and it's definitely viable. But generally speaking, the traditional way is the way that they prefer. And if you're not going to do the traditional way, you might face some difficulties with that. In the UK, there is also sort of an advantage that comes with going the traditional way. You know, when you do those exams and then you do the 2 years training period, that's what they're used to. So it's a bit more typical. But a lot of people who do that way, they, you know, it depends on the person and what they were able to show and their skills and things like that. So it's not a hard and fast rule at all. And in the UK, I would say it's a bit more forgiving if you haven't done the traditional way, especially that the way that law firms are in the UK, they're a bit less intense than the US. So there is an opportunity for a bit of differences. And then generally speaking, in law firms and in different countries, they are looking for that sort of interesting or different background to see what you can bring to the table. And that, you know, you're able to use these non-traditional experiences to your advantage in a way that, you know, would help the law firm as well as yourself. And definitely in the UK, there is a bit more of an emphasis on that, which is why they changed the exams. They're looking for people with different backgrounds. So I think that basically covers everything about how you should choose which one you should go to. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to limit yourself to, you know, the traditional way or a specific type of law or something like that. You will come across different areas in, you know, when you go to law school and when you go do internships and work experiences and placements, and you will have, you know, you'll be interested in new things that you weren't interested in before. And you'll be exposed to a lot of things. So it's not about, you know, picking things from the beginning. Definitely that's not something that you have to know right now, but you just have to understand how, you know, these employers think and what's expected of you at a later stage and things like that, so that it can help you decide how you want to proceed and how you want to become a lawyer and where you should go and which jurisdiction to choose, which country to choose. And you can always do a master's degree and use that to your advantage to sort of see if there's something else that you liked, or explore a topic or a subject that you're very interested in. And master's degrees are actually a great way to help you in your, you know, your law degree sort of process, and still kind of give you that time to figure out how you want to do things. It could be a great way to enter a country that you didn't, study at before, and maybe find an internship at that time and be able to work there. So it's not it. What I'm trying to say is that the traditional way, or the way that maybe law schools or law firms market things, that's just the way that they're used to, and that doesn't mean that that's the way that you have to go. If you like it and if it suits you, then that's good. By all means, go for it. But it doesn't mean that you'll never be a lawyer if you don't go that way. There are so many ways to qualify and so many types of laws to qualify in. So now we're going to go on to true or false, some law school myths. And we'll see, because I think these are things that people always ask, and even just random people, like if you get into a cab, some of these things, this is what they ask. And I'm going to try and make it, a bit less confusing and daunting. So myth number one, you have to study law at the undergraduate level. I think it's pretty clear that you don't. I've already mentioned this. You definitely don't have to study law right away if you want to become a lawyer. You can study anything, really. It's not, it's not typically required that if you don't study law at an undergraduate level, that means you'll never be a lawyer. It's definitely not the case. And actually, in some of the places that I've worked at, a lot of the lawyers actually did different degrees at an undergraduate level. A lot of them did chemistry or history, actually, interestingly enough, and they enjoyed it. If you're not sure whether you want to be a lawyer or not, you can study something else. See if you want to continue there, or move on to law school or do a conversion degree. Especially, when you're fresh out of high school, you're still young. Maybe you don't want to go through the intense process of law school, and you want to do something that it's just more in line with some of your other interests. So that's something that, it would be better for you at that stage. So there are so many ways you can do this, and you don't have to go to law school right away. Myth number two, law school kills your social life. This depends. It's definitely up to you how you balance. And, when you have deadlines or exams, you're definitely expected to study most of the time. But you know what? During my 3-year course, I was able to go to over 200 concerts. I'd go out a lot. And there's a different type of experience when you're sitting in the library with your friends from the morning until the night. So, maybe your social life just gets a bit different, closer to exams. Having a study buddy, that would still be considered a social life. But it really depends on how you prioritize and how you organize your time. If you're more consistent with the way that you study and things like that, then you won't be, under pressure closer to deadlines or exams. So it just really depends. You have to be a lawyer after law school. That is definitely not the case. Law school gives you a lot of transferable skills that you can use in so many other professions. And even if you know that you want to be a lawyer later on, you don't have to be, you don't have to go through the route to become a lawyer or work in a law firm right after law school. You can go into things like business or politics or accounting or finance. And a lot of people who work in these huge firms, like accounting firms or business companies and things like that, a lot of them have done law degrees. A lot of politicians have done law degrees. It gives you a lot of good skills, how to talk to people, how to work well under stress and pressure, how to manage your time, how to be organized, how to write. in a proper way. That's a very important skill, how to read properly, understand what you're reading and be able to explain these things to other people. These are very important skills that you'll learn from law school, and you can use these skills in really any profession. A lot of people go into nonprofit or government work. I have a few friends who have done that, and they're still considered lawyers because they do practice law, but they just do law in a different way that it's not the typical sort of lawyer where they go to a law firm and they read a bunch of documents and write a bunch of stuff and then talk to clients. No, it's different for them. You can also have different postgraduate options if you want to consider how you can use your law degree for something else. So there are so many things that you can do after law school. And if you didn't like law school and you want to do something else, it still helps you. I have a friend who really is into art, and she uses her law school experience to manage her art business. So that's something that is, quite, it's not typical, but it's definitely something that helped her. So this is the main myth that everyone asks, even strangers. Law is like Suits or How to Get Away with Murder. Definitely not. So for example, in Suits, there are a lot of things that would not fly in the real world. And yeah, it's not like that. And in those types of shows, they show a very particular type of lawyer, or, things that are different. That's not exactly how you practice in real life. But if you've ever watched How to Get Away with Murder, and you've seen those scenes where, Wes is asked a question and he's expected to answer, and it's a lot of pressure, and that's a really good example of the Socratic method that I talked about, that's used in the JD stage, the Juris Doctor stage. So that would be the only truth to it. Other than that, definitely not the case. And then your non-legal or non-local experience will not be valued. That's definitely not the case. And I did touch upon this a bit at the beginning. So a lot of people, if they've worked during their degree, even in things like retail, or they worked as waitresses or waiters and things like that, they can show that these skills have helped them. These are, very good, like client skills. Or if you've worked in a different country. So for example, you're studying in the UK, but you're not from the UK. And you go back home during the summer and you do some internships or placements there. These are all things that would help you out. Any skill that you learn, any job that you do, it will help you in some way, and you can always show how it helped you. So you shouldn't always focus on just, doing legal work experience or local experience. You can do different things and explore your options. It's not black and white in that way. But again, it depends on the level you're at and the country that you're in. At a higher level, for example, if you're doing your master's or something, or you're at the end of your law degree, there is a bit of an expectation that you would have done at least some law experience. So for example, even something like a placement or something like that, it just shows that you're dedicated to practicing as a lawyer and becoming a lawyer. But it's not something that will, make sure that you'll never become a lawyer again, or ever, if you don't do, legal work experience at an undergraduate level or anything like that. You can show how you've learned different skills using different things. And I would say that a lot of employers would appreciate that, even if you can't do, specific law experience or local experience, that you've tried to gain some experience using different things. And that in itself is a very good way to show that, it's you're dedicated in a different way. And last, you have to work in the same country you study. It's definitely false. For example, I don't. And Yeah, it depends on the country that you're practicing in and where you've studied. So it's definitely not a hard and fast rule. And this is why you have all these options and these non-traditional ways, and you should always consider these things. So these are some of the resources that you can use. In the US, these websites I've used myself at different stages. LSAC is also an application portal for some universities. In the UK, the student room really helped me in terms of understanding how law school would be like, or even at a higher stage, what's expected, what people have done, and just have that sense of community when you don't know what's going on. You need someone to talk to. Millie have actually done, webinars on law schools, specifically in the UK and the US, and I would definitely recommend checking them out if you're interested in one or the other or both. It gives a bit of a deeper background on specific things like how to get into law school and the subjects that you study and things like that, because today was just an overview of the comparison between both of them. So I definitely recommend checking them out and following Millie on everything that they do, really. So right now I'll answer any questions. Feel free to send them through right now, and I see that there are some specific questions in here. So someone asked, what is the most beneficial way to working in the UAE or a general Middle East region, UK or US qualification? A lot of the times this depends on the law firm that you want to go get into and practice with. Generally, UK is a bit better in the Middle East and in the UAE, especially because in the UAE, use a lot of UK law. I personally use the UK law more than the US. So there's definitely a preference for that, but then again, it depends on the firm that you're at, and some law firms, they recruit based on whether you're just generally qualified in a common law jurisdiction, not necessarily UK or US. So it really depends. How common are training contracts in the US? So a lot of the international firms in the UK, they also have offices in the US, and they do offer their training contracts in those countries as well. But because the system is different, and generally when a law firm is in that specific region, they practice that specific law and they go through that specific qualification procedure. It's different, and it's just quite different in terms of how you qualify. But there are training contracts in the US. A lot of firms do offer that, but again, it's only necessary if that firm wants to move some of its staff to the UK or to practice UK law. In the US, the training is a bit different. They do these like summer apprenticeships and things like that, and it's a different type of practice and training that you do, and they have different requirements and it's a different duration. So that's something to check and consider for each country that you're looking at and the firm that you're actually trying to apply to. How's the pay for paralegals? Is there a career path there too, or it's just a pathway before being a lawyer? In terms of being a paralegal, you can start off at a very low level, even without a law degree, or you can be a sort of non-qualified professional paralegal, and they basically practice law under the supervision of a qualified lawyer, and it's quite different. There are so many different types of paralegals, and it depends on the firm and it depends on the country. In the UK, there is an emphasis on the paralegal job being a type of path to get into becoming a lawyer. You can show that you've done some training through being a paralegal. In the UAE, a lot of people who were previously paralegals, that's how they, started the process to becoming a lawyer. But in the US and in the UK, being a paralegal is its own specific job. It has different requirements and different skill sets as well. It also depends on, the type of law that you're practicing as a paralegal. So it really depends. And your position as a paralegal and the pay and the type of work that you do depends on the level and the type of law that you're practicing. It's very varied. There's no specific answer to that. In the UK system, is law school enough to prepare for the QLTS, particularly the OSCE, or would you recommend an extra OSCE preparation course? So that question actually, if you can, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Dorina. If you can send me a message on LinkedIn, I'd be able to answer that for you. It's a very specific answer, and I just won't be able to cover everything right now. So you can scan the QR code on this slide so that you can connect on LinkedIn. You can also find me Amira Nassar on LinkedIn. I have the same photo as the one in this presentation, so you should be able to find me. So unless anyone else has any other questions, give it a few minutes to see. I think that's it. But again, if you do have any questions for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. Might get back to you a bit late, just because my law firm, we work crazy hours, and it's a very hectic schedule. But I try and get back to everyone that sends me these questions, especially in terms of UK versus US, and what I would recommend for qualifying for both. So thank you so much for attending, and I hope that was useful. Of course, you can always contact Millie for any sort of any question about things like admission and qualifications and things like that. And like I said, I'm available on LinkedIn if you need anything. And I hope that was